The National Constitutional Summit was supposed to be symbolic, a neat bow on the viral sensation that Pam Bondi and Jasmine Crockett had become. But the second they stepped onto that grand marble stage, under the blinding white lights and the seal of the United States gleaming behind them, it was clear this wasn't going to be neat. It was going to be historic. What two ideological opposites, Bondi and Crockett, stood side by side before the nation's top legal minds? Why? To deliver a joint keynote on the future of judicial ethics and constitutional dialogue. Who, the conservative prosecutor versus the progressive reformer, bound now by mutual respect and public expectation. How, through months of collaboration, mutual challenge, and a shared refusal to dilute their convictions. When, 1 year after their viral exchange, reignited faith in bipartisan reason. Where, the Lincoln Auditorium, Washington, D.C., fittingly, a hall built for debates that shape nations. As the moderator introduced them, murmurs swept through the crowd. Judges whispered to scholars, journalists whispered to aides. No one could predict whether they'd clash again or craft another miracle. Crockett began, voice steady as stone. "When I first met Pam Bondi," she said, "I expected resistance. What I found instead was rigor, and rigor is the highest form of respect." The crowd went silent. It wasn't flattery, it was truth. Crockett turned toward Bondi, not with the smugness of victory, but the confidence of understanding. "We don't agree on the meaning of the Constitution in every line or letter, but we both agree it deserves to be meant." Bondi's lips curled into that courtroom half-smile that had crushed dozens of witnesses before. "And that," she said, "is exactly why I'm here. To prove that conviction without curiosity is just arrogance in a fancy suit." The audience erupted laughter, applause, even a few cheers. They weren't performing, they were teaching. Every sentence felt like a duel disguised as dialogue. Then came the first escalation. Bondi addressed the elephant in the room, or, more accurately, the donkey and the elephant. "Let's not pretend this friendship was easy," she said. "The first time we argued off camera, we nearly broke a coffee table. She accused me of romanticizing the founders. I accused her of rewriting them." Crockett grinned, and we were both right. The crowd roared, humor sharp, disarming, the perfect release after tension. But Bondi wasn't done. She leaned forward and said, "Here's the thing. I've spent years defending judicial restraint, the belief that judges shouldn't legislate from the bench. But Jasmine reminded me of something. Sometimes restraint without empathy becomes paralysis, and the law was never meant to be paralyzed." Crockett stepped in, seizing the rhythm. "And I've spent my career pushing for reform, for accountability. But Pam reminded me that change without roots becomes chaos. The Constitution is our root, not our cage." The applause was deafening, but beneath it there was silence, the kind that comes from collective realization. Because both women were dismantling their own stereotypes live. The prosecutor was defending empathy. The reformer was defending restraint. And in that reversal, they made everyone in the room rethink what principle actually meant. Then Crockett paused, scanning the crowd. "Our country doesn't need perfect agreement," she said. "It needs intelligent tension. Tension keeps systems alive. It's what keeps bridges standing." Bondi raised an eyebrow. "You know," she quipped, "I used to think tension was just what CNN producers lived off. But you're right, tension is the pulse of democracy. When we stop arguing, we stop thinking." Laughter again, a moment of levity before the next blow of brilliance. Then came the twist. Bondi looked down at her prepared remarks, then tossed the papers aside. "Let's talk honestly," she said. "We have judges who interpret ethics like preferences and politicians who interpret laws like fashion trends. The founders didn't plan for that, they planned for us to outgrow it. But instead, we've been shrinking." Her voice hardened. "We don't need more judges who act like celebrities. We need citizens who think like jurists." Gasps, applause. The tension rose again. Crockett, not missing a beat, countered. And we don't need citizens who worship the past. We need citizens who learn from it, because worship freezes time. Learning moves it forward. That line, worship freezes time, trended on X within the hour. But the energy in the hall kept climbing. You could feel ideology melting into intellect. Bondi turned toward Crockett, and for the first time in her career, she looked almost vulnerable. "You know," she said, "I used to think the Constitution was a fortress, walls to keep the chaos out. But maybe it's a bridge, and I was just guarding the wrong end." Crockett nodded softly. "And I used to think conservatives feared change. But now I see they just fear losing the foundation before the house is rebuilt. I can respect that." That moment, that single exchange, was later replayed in slow motion during news recaps, with orchestral crescendos and dramatic captions like, "When respect sounded like revolution." But the real revolution was still coming. As they finished, the moderator thanked them, but before applause could settle, Bondi spoke again. "We're not done." Crockett tilted her head, surprised. Bondi continued, "Jasmine and I have decided to take this project national. Law schools aren't enough. Congress isn't enough. We're going to bring constitutional dialogue into high schools before the cynicism starts." Gasps rippled through the room. Bondi looked at Crockett. "You in?" Crockett smiled, that fierce, fearless smile that had disarmed a nation. "You're damn right I am. If teenagers can debate TikTok trends, they can debate the Bill of Rights." The room exploded. Reporters scrambled for statements. Judges stood. Cameras flashed. But beyond the spectacle, something seismic had shifted. Two women had turned political combat into civic education. Later that night, as headlines flooded in, Bondi and Crockett launched nationwide civic initiative. A journalist asked them, "Do you two ever argue off stage?" Crockett laughed. "Every day." Bondi added, "And that's the point." But beneath the jokes was a deeper truth. They'd realized that disagreement wasn't the disease, disrespect was. A week later, their joint article dropped in the Harvard Law Review. Title: "Dialogue Over Doctrine, the Constitutional Case for Listening." It opened with a line so simple, it pierced through centuries of noise. Our founders debated fiercely, because they believed truth was strong enough to survive an argument. That essay broke academic firewalls. It was cited by liberal and conservative commentators alike. One conservative judge called it the most important piece of legal writing since Federalist 78. A progressive professor tweeted, "This isn't bipartisanship, it's intellectual renaissance." But perhaps the most poetic aftermath came months later. At the Federal Judicial Center, a newly appointed judge stood before a panel. When asked what guided her judicial philosophy, she said, "Respectful tension, as taught by Crockett and Bondi." It wasn't ideology anymore, it was legacy. And as both women stood again, this time at the closing ceremony of the Constitutional Dialogue Project, Bondi looked out over a crowd of students holding miniature copies of the Constitution. She said, "If you remember one thing, don't inherit my beliefs, inherit my discipline." Then Crockett added, "And never let disagreement scare you, fear silence instead." The applause didn't just fill the hall, it felt like it filled the country. Outside, protesters who had once stood on opposite sidewalks were now mingled, arguing, laughing, debating, but talking. The narrator's voice would have said it best. It wasn't peace, it was participation, and for democracy, that's better. As the credits rolled on that symbolic chapter of American civics, Bondi turned to Crockett and said quietly, "You know, you could have made one hell of a prosecutor." Crockett smirked, "And you would have made one hell of a reformer." They both laughed, the kind of laughter that comes not from agreement, but from understanding. Because in a system addicted to outrage, they reminded the nation that the loudest voice isn't always the strongest. Sometimes, it's the one willing to listen. The final scene, caught by a stray camera, showed them walking out of the auditorium together, not side by side, but step by step, alternating rhythm like two sides of the same heartbeat. And as their microphones went silent, the echo of their words lingered, not just in the room, but in the country's conscience. Conviction is easy, respect is earned, and wisdom. Crockett turned back one last time. Wisdom, she said, is when you stop trying to win the argument and start trying to understand the Constitution. Fade to black. The courtroom of public opinion had finally witnessed something rare. Not victory, but virtue.